Hello and welcome to Higher Thinking on Higher Ed. I am Sharlyn Carrington of Content Strong Communications, the communications and marketing leader of choice for universities and colleges and nonprofits. And today I am so excited to continue diving into the trends and the challenges encountered by leaders in higher education. Today I am honored to welcome Marriel Hardy to the hot seat today. Marriel is the Associate Vice President for Marketing and Communications at Alcorn State University, returning to his alma mater to lead media relations, content strategy, brand development, an award-winning communications leader. He previously elevated branding and engagement at Talladega College, at another community college, and I'm going to butcher the name. I'm so sorry, so I'm not going to say it. You can correct me later. But securing significant grants and setting new records in social media engagement. Thank you so much again for bringing your expertise to this conversation. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So first of all, let me just pronounce this college's name correctly. Is it Coahoma Community College? How do I say that?
Coahoma.
Coahoma. Okay, okay. I'm only, partly horrible today. Um, so yes, thanks for taking the time. The first question I typically like to ask really is just a little bit about context setting, right? Tell me a little bit about your role as Associate Vice President. Tell me what's kind of going on at Alcorn. How does your work connect to the broader goals of the university, particularly as it looks to grow in its visibility and its reputation, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I consider myself a storyteller. I know we can go behind the nuts and bolts and things, but I think a good story is what really moves the needle forward.
Right,
I always like to do work that evokes an emotional connection. So I think
right,
that if our prospective students can see themselves here at the institution, if our faculty and staff feel as though their work is worthwhile and seen, and if our alumni have a point of pride, that's the kind of work I like to do. So, what we have been doing here at my alma mater is trying to celebrate the rich history and legacy of this institution for over 150 years, providing access and
hmm,
opportunities to young people, and also an outreach component supporting socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers all across the state. So, we have been intentional about those stories, celebrating the wins, and also making sure people know that a quality HBCU education is still
right,
valuable and that we have the access to resources that, other institutions don't offer our students. So we want to make sure that we
right.
are a safe haven, especially when we start talking about the climate in which we live. You know, because of certain factors, I'm not going to do a deep dive into that, but we have to make sure that we let prospective students know that they have a place where they can be around like-minded people who support them,
Right.
who want to be there for them and nurture them to go on to the next level. And they can do that right here at Alcorn State University.
Right. I love everything that you said, and I have several follow-up questions. But the first thing is I'm gonna challenge you a little bit. So, and my second question is only in the sense of, my go deeper into what some of the challenges are, because my next question is let's look at the shifts, the current shifting climate right now. How is that impacting your world, your work, the way you're communicating, how you're communicating to, you mentioned students, faculty, alumni, I'm assuming as your kind of your key audiences, your key focuses. And then of course, thinking about the other stuff like digital engagement, just shifting public perspectives. How does all of this overall industry shift impact your work day to day?
Well, a lot of it is something that has not changed over time. And I think a lot of people don't think about it in the HBCU setting, is that
Right,
we're challenged to do a lot more with less. So we've
right.
had to be strategic in using the resources that we have to be very effective, strategic, and focused in what we're doing. So, we empower our campus community to share the good news, to also work with us collaboratively to make sure that we're using the resources that we have and promote the information in new ways. Sometimes when you are at these institutions with wonderful legacy, sometimes we can be a bit
Mhm.
stoic and we don't want to move the needle forward. So having those one-to-one conversations with our constituent groups here on campus to tell them, hey, social media is a great thing. Let's leverage the power of digital. So really bringing people on board is something that we're super focused on, and also using our students as those brand ambassadors, putting them in front of the
Mhm.
camera, giving that authentic voice of what's really going on and giving our alumni and other constituent groups the heartbeat of what's going on here on campus by putting them forward. So, we're using digital campaigns to hit our enrollment goals. So that means having those conversations with our people here on campus in admissions and other areas. I think sometimes we're so driven by our own goals in our departments that we close our
Mhm.
minds. But, you know, everything works as a well-oiled machine. So what we try to do is break down the silos. We try to open up the conversation and really do that team building and have the perception of our people here on campus shift so we know that we can all come together and make those things happen through collaboration and us coming together in the early stages of planning and different processes to have those conversations. So we're trying to shift a cultural mindset as we think about what the story is and how we deliver it beyond our gates.
So you talked a little bit there about shifting internal cultural mindsets, which is what I took away from that, really shifting
Mhm.
the idea of
Yeah.
how, internal groups are working and using some of the
Mhm.
digital tools and stuff that are at their fingertips.
Mhm.
You talked earlier about, this idea that HBCUs, you got to work, you got to do a lot more with a
We do.
lot less. And
Yeah.
now, some of the others HBCUs I've spoken to throughout this series, they talk to me a little bit about this idea that, students are, it's more competitive for students that previously were overlooked because now
Yeah.
all these other institutions are like, well, hey, we need to be doing this kind of outreach to get these students. These students are valuable to us and our bottom line and our, environments and so on in these ways. I
Mhm.
wonder if, that is something you guys are also facing as well, this idea that you're
Absolutely.
having more competition from students. But the other bigger conversation, or I'd say climate shift, let's say, related to the way some of the students who of course would be coming there are treated right now and are being treated and are being approached right now, if that is impacting even in a small positive way the way you're able to communicate to those students, to be able to really build what you said, that idea of look at the legacy we've had in serving you and create and uplifting this communities, and we're still here doing that. That was a big long question just to say what are what are you kind of seeing in that realm right now related to kind of your storytelling and reaching the students you're trying to reach.
Absolutely. Legacy, the authenticity. I think, anyone knows in this climate that certain groups are being targeted, certain
Mhm.
groups are being put to the forefront, and some are being left behind. So I think it would be a disservice to the legacy of this institution that came out of post-Civil War if we did not reach out to those students and let them know that, hey, we have this space and this availability to them. Now, going back to your
Right.
earlier point, you know, doing less with more, everyone is after the same students. I
Hmm.
know you've had this conversation with many people in this series, the enrollment cliff, it's coming, it's coming, it's
Hmm.
coming. So, that's something that's top of mind for, R1 institutions, let alone, a
Right.
small HBCU in Southwest Mississippi. But, those are the conversations that we're having. You know, are we going to invest a little bit more in our outreach digital components that we have? Are we going to adopt best practices? What is going to be the ROI if we spend, much more money on these more sophisticated tools that other institutions have been using for years,
Right.
but we have to make the investment now so we can survive and move forward and think about the future. We can't just think about our enrollment for this particular academic year. We have to think about 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and what does that look like? And that means we have to have intentional conversations on campus about making those huge investments now and understanding, hey, what we did 20 years ago is not going to work. You know, we
Right.
are up against some powerhouse institutions that have great legacies and great origin stories themselves. But we have to also we can't live and sit on our laurels that, oh, we have a compelling story. That's just not going to work.
Right.
It's a great point of pride, but we also have to make sure that we invest in the digital infrastructures and meet students where they are. And that's something that we're trying to be intentional about.
So, I mean, you talk very poignantly and very strategically just there about this idea of digital infrastructure. And we know certainly that's changing so rapidly, so quickly with all the different tools and AI and what that means for the way that we work day in and day out. What strategies or campaigns, and just really diving in a little bit here, what strategies or campaigns have been, I don't know, especially successful for your team recently, and where are you still kind of hitting those roadblocks?
Yeah, yeah. I'm new to the institution. And so what I have observed thus far in the work that we have done is really getting with the times.
Right,
Again, sometimes again with these our institutions, our HBCUs, we can be a little bit stoic, and especially
right.
one that has a proud history as we have here. But what I'm seeing is the conversations are being had about the constant contact that we need to have with students now. Gone are the days where you send a letter, you've been accepted, and then we don't hear from you until you show up on campus. So we're intentionally looking at services, tools, and platforms that are going to keep that constant contact beyond us having physical people, in the desk. That's a
Right,
challenge. We don't have the number of people that we need that will be ideal. Let me say that will be ideal
right,
to have those touch points with our students. So we're looking at digital services, AI, and different applications that we can use to really connect with those students without having a body to actually do it. That's going to call them up,
mhm,
that's going to send that email, that's going to go through their application process and ensure that all the boxes are checked to move through. So, even a small institution like us, we have to think strategically, and that's what we're doing here about how we can move the needle forward with less, but still having
right.
to make a substantial investment to get over that hump and be competitive because, as these other institutions, you know, uh, just have the money, they have the resources, they have the bodies to do these things, and HBCUs don't. So we're
Right.
having those intentional conversations and making the investments to move forward.
So would you say that's your biggest, I don't know, challenge, I guess, right now, or roadblock to some of the strategies is just this idea of one, resourcing and people to carry out the work, but two, the finding different ways and avenues to reach people, or is there something else?
No, no, that's it. It's resources. It's
Right.
resources. When you think about, and I don't want to speak too broadly on other departments, but I can share that, if you have a recruiter that's on the road, and then they have to come back and they're processing applications and all that. No, their
Right.
focus needs to be making those one-to-one connections. And
Right.
that's something that we're looking at. How do we keep our students, our prospective students, excuse me, and our parents informed and keep the conversation going so we don't just get them from, hey, this is this great school called Alcorn. But no, we want that process to get them here on campus. So we're looking at, again, AI and different applications and services to move that forward. And that means making a substantial investment. But it's a
Right.
necessary investment when you think about the powerhouses and the different challenges that we're facing in today's ecosystem.
That's a good point. And, certainly you're not the only institution that I've spoken to. I feel like this is a problem across the board. Is like,
Oh, yeah.
there's are wonderful tools. It's either some people are afraid to adopt them, some people are really excited to adopt them, but they don't have the time or the energy or there's a fear of failure in trying to adopt something or the risk of adopting something that doesn't work. And really, and then the expense of like of trying it out and what happens if you waste an entire year on another tool that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily work. Is there anything else? Are there any other strategies that have really worked for you or something you're really proud of recently that you guys have, been able to do in terms of, and as you rightfully say, this place for one-to-one connection, that something that you've recently done that's given you good opportunity to create those one-to-one connections and broaden that experience for students?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think for me, one thing that we have done here on campus is provide our campus community with the education and information to bust up the silos that happen. I think
Okay.
sometimes the needles are not moving forward because everyone is so busy doing what they have to do. We're trying to check the box and move things forward. But we've been intentional about setting the baselines here. We can talk about things externally, but sometimes people don't understand, why something takes as long as it does to produce. And it's just not a lack of them. It's not because they are not willing to get on board. It's just they don't know the processes. So we've taken things down to the granular level, getting the infrastructures in place when we talk about policies, procedures, internal tools, as well as, again, having those one-to-one relationships and conversations, workshops, things of that nature to make sure that our campus community understands what the brand is and how we deliver it properly. Again, I think
Right.
sometimes we get into situations where we're moving so fast that we get things lost in the sauce, but we are just trying to make sure here that we're setting a strong baseline and having everyone informed about how we properly move the needle forward and represent the institution in the very best light that we want it to be. We're selling a legacy, an institution with a strong legacy, a proud legacy, and ensuring that our campus community supports us and understands why that's important, especially now, is something that we're critically taking a look at and making sure that we, again, provide that information and education to our campus community.
I think that's a really good point. This idea of, ensuring that you have that alignment in terms of understanding the brand across the board, across the entire community. Because at the end of the day, when you have faculty, staff, students, alumni who are out, become the ambassadors of that brand, and particularly in
Absolutely.
a time right now that is so contentious, really having all of these different groups out there pushing the brand and building that community will make a big difference, of course, for your institution and the experience on campus. You talked a little bit earlier about engagement and enrollment. Tell me a little bit about some of the metrics you guys are focused on tracking, whether that is engagement or visibility or student recruitment or, alumni connection. And how are you measuring all of those kind of outputs your team is doing and the larger, I guess, outcomes for your university?
Yeah, for sure. We always want to make data informed decisions. I think that we do nothing different than any reputable comms team would do, and that's looking at the
Right.
numbers. Having tools like Meltwater so we can go out and see, what's working, what's not working, seeing where our engagement is happening, placement, where is the name ringing, where are we being mentioned, so making sure that we do on a weekly basis. We look at our numbers against last week. We look at campaigns to see what was successful. Why was it successful? What times is the best times for us to post? What messaging is really resonating with our constituent groups? So using those tools and pulling those reports is something that we're intentional about doing because it matters. Gone are the days when you can throw something on the wall and see
Mm.
what sticks. So we're making sure that we're taking a look at the numbers and we're being strategic in what we're doing. Everything isn't going to be a home run, but at least we have the information to best plot our next steps forward.
I think that's a good point that you just said there. Everything is not going to be a home run. I think everyone is
No,
always trying to make the thing viral and the thing go big, but you can also learn so much from
yeah,
the smaller details, even the things that don't blow up the way you want them to. There's so much learning in the analysis and what the
it's
story
hard.
means. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm one of those people who, hey, I've worked on projects that I just knew it was going to be amazing. It was a passion project and we put it out there and it just did not resonate. And that can be deflating. But
Yeah.
again, like you just said, to your point, it's not always about things that are just going to blow up and be viral. Sometimes it's just about, those one or two people that you reach that it resonates with or that point of pride that alumni see when they see that information. So, you have to take the good with the bad. But, again, that's something that we're really trying to look at closely. And again, setting the baseline and having a hard reset of what we're doing and why. I think sometimes you forget your why. It's not about, often big titles and things of that nature, but it's about seeing these students move forward. And,
Right.
one of my favorite times of year is always graduation. I don't know all of our students, but it's something about seeing them walk across that stage. And that is the why. You see these students who come from nothing,
Right.
and you can imagine yourself, I was one of those students, I attended this university off of a full scholarship, and now I've returned in a leadership capacity. So I'm just invested in ensuring that the work that we do is good and it supports our students in their dreams, goals, and ambitions.
I love that you said that, this idea that you're really pushing for seeing them cross that finish line and then continuing to re-engage them once they do that, to do something like you, to continue to be a part of, whether it's, become on staff or become leadership, but to continue to be part of the community, right?
Yeah.
Is that, and I wouldn't say is that, but I'd say really you're looking ahead to the next 6 to 12 months.
Mhm.
What are your big goals? What are your big marketing communications efforts and priorities going to be over the next few months? And maybe even, on a personal level as well, what goals are you setting for yourself in this next chapter of your career here at Alcorn?
Yeah, yeah. Some of our goals right now are increasing our digital footprint.
Right.
We want to be placed in, areas that we have not. And we also want to, do more with connected TV, digital advertising, and geofencing
Right.
as well. So that's an area that we have dabbled in, we've been successful in. We want to expand that. Again, we have a
Right.
compelling story, and we want to make sure that we meet people with that story. And beyond that, we want to make sure that we are telling our story in new and compelling ways, more human interest.
Hmm.
Everybody has a department of biology majors, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But,
Right.
how do these degrees impact the lives of our graduates and our students? What are the implications of our research? We want to tell those stories to show that,
Health mix.
a small institution like us, is viable, we're impactful, and that we have a global reach. So being intentional about those stories and really pushing the brand is something that we are really, really looking at, and that we're going to be intentional about, on a much larger scale than we've done in the past. We have seen a dip in some things that we've done in the past. Our magazine that's coming back this year, so just really
Right.
getting back to the basics and celebrating the good news that's going on here in new and bold ways is what we're after. So I think, like you said, in the next 6 to 12 months, you're going to see a new, brighter, more showcased Alcorn, and it's built on a proud foundation that has always been there, but it's going to be a new look. It's going to be fresh, and I think it's going to be really exciting.
Right. I love that. My last question, some people like it, some people hate it. We'll see where you fall in this one. It's some people find it challenging to figure out to pick just one. If I gave you a magic wand right now, pretend it was my pen, and you could wave it and you can eliminate one major challenge. It could be communications, it could be a leadership challenge, whatever. No budget, no barriers, no red tape. What would you fix first and why?
Oh, wow. That
See?
is super hard. Yeah, yeah, it is.
See?
It is.
Yeah.
Knowing the challenges of a institution like Alcorn, even beyond my seat and what I do on a daily basis, I would wave that wand to help us with some of our deferred maintenance here. Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a challenge when you think about the disparities in budgets and how money is allocated at times. But
Right.
I would really want to see funding be at a level of some of our sister schools, so that we could have the facilities that are
Right.
representative of the rich history. And of course, if I could have a little money in my area, so we can do all the things we need to do with digital campaigns, and we can bring in the bodies that we need to support the good work that we're trying to do. So it's all about the money. So that's what I
I
would be
know.
looking
And
for.
you know what? You're not the only person who has given that answer. So along the same lines,
Mhm.
everyone is saying we're strapped. And it's so funny because, and not funny, haha, but just
Yeah.
funny to see the comparison across the board when, it is continuing to become such a challenge to continue to uplift and showcase. This is why higher ed is so important. And people say, well,
Mhm.
the price tag is so high. It is, but it needs to be so that we can continue to deliver, it in the way
Absolutely.
we want to deliver it, right? So,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to mention that I didn't get a chance to ask you about?
No, no, no. I've enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate the time. You have been amazing. I've been following your series, and I've been thoroughly impressed with everything that you have been doing I think it's great work, it's worthwhile work. And look, hey, if you ever need me again or have an opportunity, look, I'm here and open for a conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience and your perspective with us today. I mean, it's such been, as you rightfully said, a really thoughtful and generous conversation. To our listeners or watchers, I hope this episode sparked new ideas, affirmed your own experiences, or helped you see a challenge in a new light. If you are a leader in higher ed, communications, marketing, enrollment, whatever, and you want to contribute to this conversation, I'd love to hear from you because the truth is these conversations are more than just talk. Ideally, they'll be a start of a shared roadmap for the future of our field. So let's get to work. Thank you so much, Marielle.
You're very welcome.